I realise this video will come out very grainy because it's being lit by a pretty dim light, but unfortunately it's the only light I have easy access to at the moment, apart from my phone torch, which might be a bit jarring. So I'll have to make do with this. This video is going to be addressing a kind of a misconception which has arisen because of the program QI, and it's not that QI has deliberately caused this misconception or said anything wrong. QI is a program in the UK. It's a sort of panel show where there's a host, which was Stephen Fry in older series, but nowadays it's Sandy Toksvig. And then there's a panel of sort of guests who are often sort of comedians or writers or people like that. And the host presents questions that have a kind of obvious answer, or an answer that most people would think was obvious. And then the panel, some member of the panel says the obvious answer, and then the host points out why it's technically wrong. So, you know, they might address things like urban myths, or they might just go into the technical details of why something's technically wrong. And it's quite interesting, which is the QI stands for quite interesting, and it is very interesting. And this particular segment was about the pronunciations in early modern English represented by spellings like this. And most people's idea of how this is pronounced, at least before this episode of QI aired, was that it was pronounced something like Ye Olde shop or Ye Olde shop. And the host was pointing out, I think it was Stephen Fry at that point, was pointing out that in early modern English it was actually pronounced closer to the old shop. The main point being that this letter Y in this phrase represents a the sound, just like the th would in modern English. So the definite article here, which corresponds to the word the in modern English, was still pronounced something like the in the early 1600s. And that's absolutely right. The misconception that I think people have taken away is an extrapolation of that, which is that the nominative form of the word you, which in early modern English was ye, also had a the sound at the start, so that it was pronounced the or the or something like that. And in this case it was actually pronounced with a y. So in early modern English, say around 1600, the definite article the and the pronoun ye were two separate words, and one of them had the at the start and one of them had y at the start. In the early Middle English period, the and th sounds were both represented with this letter thorn, which had been inherited from Old English, and in turn it had been taken from a runic letter, because the Latin alphabet didn't have its own native letter for the and th sounds, because Latin hadn't had them. In the late Middle English period, when spelling conventions still hadn't become standardised, people used the thorn letter less and less, and instead used the th digraph like we still do now. But back then, materials for writing were more expensive than they are now, and so, just like in Old English and Latin, there were lots of abbreviations for common words so that people didn't have to write them out in full over and over again. Two especially common words in English are the and that. So instead of writing the and that throughout a document, it became normal just to write y with a little e above it, or y with a little t above it. Why did they use y rather than thorn or th? Well, probably because th wouldn't be the most efficient abbreviation, because that's two letters, and a lot of printers didn't have types for the letter thorn because they imported their types from parts of Europe that didn't use that letter. In the typefaces that existed at the time, y and thorn looked more similar to each other than they do now, so these abbreviations made sense. So too long didn't read. In early modern English, ye with a y sound was the pronoun meaning you. The or the with a th sound was the article, as in the apple, the goat, but for a time they were both spelled with the letter y, and that doesn't reflect any kind of sound change or sound merger, it's just a spelling convention. This convergence in spelling wouldn't have caused people to mix up the words in everyday speech. The second misconception we'll be addressing is a more niche one. I've seen this one a few times on forums and things, but it's definitely not as widespread as the thorn thing. But it's the idea that thou and you at one point rhymed with each other. And this is a perfectly logical thing to think from a couple of angles. So you might be aware that in late Middle English, thou was pronounced thou, and you might be aware that in some West Midlands dialect of English, you is now pronounced something like yo. Sorry if I've messed that up completely. But in most dialects, in literary dialects, thou and you never rhymed with each other. In Old English, the words were eo and thu. By late Middle English, this has progressed to you and thu. It's a slightly more subtle difference to us, but you, thu, thu. And through the great vowel shift into early modern English, thu became tho, and then tho, and a century or two later than that, the ew diphthong in you smoothed to oo, as in you. And by that point in the southeast of England, thou was already archaic, so at no point did they actually have the same vowel in most English dialects. I know picking apart misconceptions can come across as more nitpicky than helpful, so hopefully this was at least interesting, and I'll talk to you very soon.
Ich saach on swivnes sumor, sfred de seoknes on treu water na lachte. Le fil tidum chims to me wat leodlich on swivnum. Mon shall money midwunion on huse. Ich without an odrum aanhagasel beon.